Hi Blaine, hi Joshua, hi Joe Miguel, Mike, and Patrick.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Travis.
Hi Travis.
Good afternoon.
Hi Daniel. Okay. As Sage is not going to join us, let's start. Yeah, welcome everyone to today's Orchestration meeting. Looks like we have 3 topics. Blaine, drive groups.
Don't know who all has had a chance to look at the design doc for sorry, it's still early. The design OSD addition and removal in Rook through the Orchestrator CR. But we are hoping to pass drive groups through the cluster CRD in Rook. The questions that I have based on the discussion we've been having upstream in Rook are asking if drive groups have the ability to version them by some sort of ID. Also wondering if they have some sort of like API version.
Not yet.
And wondering if Ceph volume can accept YAML as input with the drive group, or if it's just JSON string.
There was a pull request open for that, for adding drive groups to Ceph volume itself. Joshua, you know? Do you remember?
Yeah, we dropped that, and we were translating the drive groups to actual Ceph volume calls in the PyCommon module. So Ceph volume doesn't, it doesn't translate it itself, so it rather gets the Ceph volume, so the constructed Ceph volume call. But to the initial question, this module does accept JSON and YAML. So.
Okay. So follow-up question to that, because I thought the point was for Ceph volume to accept a drive group spec, and then it would just do the thing that it needed to do. How does the orchestrator module assume to work? Does it want to issue Ceph volume commands?
Yes.
Okay.
So you pass it. You pass the orchestrator a drive group specification or a file or whatever, and that gets directly translated to a Ceph volume call, and that will then eventually be executed on the target host or on the target hosts.
Well, not the orchestrator itself. The translation is a library Python command which can be used by everyone, including Ceph volume.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
So we could. So adding a possibility to actually accept drive groups would now be a bit easier, as we just have to add a dependency to the Python common library in Ceph. Or we could make a tool out of it, of the existing translate functionality, which is already packaged and easily installable. So there are plenty of ways to make the translation usable to Rook.
Yeah, so a challenge or a thought I have around this challenge is that the difference between declarative and imperative orchestration, because Rook is all about declarative. Ceph ADM is about imperative. In Rook, we don't really want the imperative step volume commands. I mean, we could probably figure out how to make that work, but there's always a way to make things work. But that if we're generating step volume commands directly from the orchestrator, then we'd have to pass those around through the cluster CR somehow. And anyway, I'd have to think through that more. But feel like there's a clash between imperative versus declarative. The drive group feels like a declarative thing.
Yep.
And
it is.
The orchestrator, if the orchestrator is translating it to imperative, then, but it still has to go through Rook, then, how could we move that?
So in any case, I would prefer if the drive groups are passed through as drive groups within the CRDs, either the Ceph cluster CRD or a drive group CRD. I don't know. But as long as we store the drive groups in the CRDs, then either Ceph volume needs to translate it to an imperative command, or we need a tool, a kind of a wrapper tool to translate it into an imperative Ceph volume command. But in any case, storing Ceph volume commands in the CRDs doesn't really make sense, in my opinion.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's really a very, very small portion of the code. The translation from the drive groups to an actual call is like 50 lines of code. So that's a really, really small portion. The big portion is translating the declarative drive group to the mapping of the devices. That's the big portion, and that's universal for all orchestrators.
And it would be great to have the same algorithm for every orchestrator, Rook and Ceph ADM, etc.
Right. Is that something that we can, like a feature that we can request of Ceph volume is to accept drive groups as input? I think that sounds like the most straightforward way to do things. That way there doesn't need to be like a third-party library to do something that is using that shared library that we intended to like be able to share code and be built in.
Unfortunately, Jan is not here today. I've pinged him, but he's I think still traveling. So.
Well, with the device handling code, so if that's where the biggest piece of it is that already in Ceph volume, or I guess I'm not clear where that code would be.
It's in a common
library. It feels like it should be in Ceph volume, but a library.
Yeah. Currently, it's in Python Ceph Common, Python Ceph Common, but it doesn't really matter where it actually lives, because I think we have access to that code from where we were calling. So if it's in Ceph volume or if it's in Python Ceph Common, doesn't matter in the end. Because I think also Rook does call currently Ceph volume directly, right?
That's right.
And so the translation from which drives should be targeted to the actual Ceph volume call is kind of trivial. And No.
So yeah, so if Ceph volume can call that library to basically do the device processing, and if the translation is pretty small anyway, and could also be called from Ceph volume, yeah, that feels like the right discussion to have to put it in Ceph volume.
So another question is where to put drive groups. In a dedicated custom resource definition or within a Ceph cluster custom resource?
Yeah, my thinking is just in the Ceph clusters CR that we already have. We have like 2 different ways already to specify OSDs, raw devices, or PVCs, and this would just be another section for drive groups. That's what I'm thinking.
One question, my concerns about that. Okay, I think that basically the drive group structure is something that has been created to make easy or to specify a set of device to be used in OSDs. Okay, and is basically a selection that is made by the user in certain moment. Okay, so probably the definition that the user is going to use the first day is not going to be valid in the second day or in the third day. Okay, because we have selected part of the devices, and these devices are used for OSDs. So the second day is a different set of devices what is going to be selected. Or even if we change or we modify the infrastructure in the cluster, possibly the drive group, this drive group that was used by the user in the first day is not right. Okay, so I think that is something that is selecting a set of device in certain point in the time. So I think that it's not a good idea to store the drive group specification in CRDs or any other kind of elements of software.
Well, just can I cut you off here?
Yeah.
So the thing is, it's not quite right that the drive group is incorrect after the first usage. It is designed to be idempotent. So especially, so not the drive group itself is idempotent, but the resulting command. So that in our case, and it should be the universal case, it calls Ceph volume LVM batch, and batch is designed to be idempotent. So it will create every time it will create the same command, resulting in the same disks that are used, and therefore it will just if the device is already, the OS is already deployed, it will just do nothing and return you like a 0. Okay, so they can be persistent even though they are even valid on the same day, on the second day as they're on the first day. On the second day, they will just not do anything. Right?
Yes, but if the second day, for example, the user has added a new disk, it could be possible that this disk will be automatically used because in the specification it was this disk are included. What I mean is that it's something that well, if you are going to use any kind of abstract definition of the set of devices, what you are going to have is something that is true in certain moment in the time, and you don't know if this is going to be true the next day. So if you deem that this is the drive group is something that is going to can be used in any moment, what you are going to have is that the system is going to take decisions an automatic way without querying or without the final user confirmation.
That's correct, yes. So there is currently no locking. So if you deploy your OSDs on the first day and on the second day you add a new disk and that matches your drive group specification, it would go out and, for example, add a new OSD. So there's no locking apparently in place. Maybe it's a good idea to have something like that, but
Right. Yeah, and I
So
think that behavior matches the design of drive groups, right? It's just a question. If the dashboard wants to treat it as imperative, then maybe the dashboard module or whatever, however we implement it, maybe it would remove it from the spec after it's done. Blaine had that in his PR design as well. So there are ways to make it look imperative, but yeah, go ahead, Sebastian.
So Miguel and Joshua, so drive groups are only declarative if we are not using every functionality provided by drive groups. Like Joshua, I think you've discovered that if you use direct path names, then they are no longer declarative, right? But as far as I remember in DeepC. So the idea was to only specify a group of drives based on some property and not by the volatile device path.
Correct. So that's the whole idea, that we do not use paths or path names at all. We just use the properties, attributes of disks, and that way we describe how a setup should look like. So on that topic, I added I added docs. There is here a follow-up docs. I added that to the Etherpad. Maybe that makes it a bit more clear. And we would, or at least I would strongly recommend against using static path names altogether, because that's kind of defeating the purpose of drive groups and the whole declarative approach that we're taking. So,
well, my concern is just the same. If we use a declarative way to define a set of devices, what we have is that this declarative way is going to produce different results depending of what is the infrastructure. If you add, if you remove disk, host, nodes, okay? So I think that, it has certain utility, but if, I think that it is going, this implies that the user should be completely aware that the system is going to take decisions by itself. So this is my major concern.
Yes, and that's currently correct. Although it does only add things and doesn't remove things. So if your cluster layout changes, it would not magically remove and realign the OSDs. It would only add new ones currently. I mean, because I think the automatic removal or rearrangement is a bit scary currently.
Yeah.
A bit.
Yeah. And so your concern really is about does the user unexpectedly get OSDs when maybe he wanted to use his devices for something else or wasn't ready to add them to his cluster, or so. Yeah, I guess if we're going to design it to be declarative, which is also good for the Rook side, then the dashboard should somehow make that visible or part of the UX that, hey, you've selected all devices of this size. In the future, we'll add them automatically for you. However the dashboard's designed.
Yeah, is there a way in the drive groups to like specify, like if you wanted to keep some disks on reserve or like have some ability to like add more disks and prepare for trying to like do some different configuration to have the drive groups only create like some number of OSDs, like where it's like, okay, after this point, I'm going to stop. Okay.
Yep.
So like it should still be possible.
A limit feature, it's called, and that just limits the number of disks that are picked. So if you want to have like two spare disks that are not touched by Ceph, then you can just limit the amount, and even if you add more, it will just not touch them. But it's also declarative.
It sounds like we do have a declarative method of actually requesting like that sort of thing.
Yes.
Another possibility was just to present more possibilities, okay, using drive groups. if you don't store the drive group itself, okay, if you only get the drive group specification and translate it into Ceph volume commands and execute these commands and make the provision of the OSDs, what you are going to have is exactly what the user wants in that moment, okay? So if we forget the drive group specification in that moment, no new or no collateral effects are going to be present. So this is another possibility. The other thing is to continue with this and well to be well to accept that the system can have or new OSTs added automatically. I don't know what is the right decision.
So you're arguing about an ephemeral. Is that the right word?
What? Sorry?
Like a temporary drive group that you only call once, right?
Yes.
But there's a problem with this is I see that you, let's say you created your drive group and then you deploy your cluster, you bootstrap it, and then a month later or even half a year later you want to add new disks, and then you have to kind of like reinvent your drive group that matches your current layout, which can be quite hard. So I would actually go for a permanent drive group that you store somewhere, I don't know where, and you have to be aware, or we have to make users aware that when they add new hardware that matches this kind of specification, it will result in new OSDs, because I think that is actually what users want. So they have usually nodes that have a certain amount of disks, and they have a certain layout, like for example, like 20 HDDs and 2 SSDs, and they want to stick to this kind of layout. And the only operations that they want to do is like add more or replace. And so this specification would be always kind of true-ish.
Okay.
At least that's my impression.
So I think part of a question related to this is whether the orchestrator module is planning to remember drive groups that it has used for nodes, or by like, because it sounds like that's something that is kind of desired, is that something remembers the drive group used. So Rook can, I mean, given the proposal that we have and the direction that we're moving, I think Rook will be able to remember the drive group used. But for talking about sort of orchestrators as a broad topic, does it make sense for the orchestrator module to store somewhere in Ceph the drive groups that it has previously used, or I don't, just otherwise store somehow drive groups that it used on a node?
Well, in the definition of the orchestrators modules, one of the design principles is that the orchestrator does not store or suppose nothing about the state or the configuration of the external orchestrator. Okay, so it's something that it can be done, but the right way to do is that the external orchestrator should store all the configuration, all the needs that it needs to work.
Yeah.
Okay. So Rook storing that information makes sense.
Yeah.
As would the SSH orchestrator storing that somehow.
So having the drive groups in Rook to be stored would make it possible to use to directly upload YAML files to Rook instead of always needing to go through the manager module, which might be desired for some use cases.
Yeah, I definitely see an advantage of putting it in the CR if somebody's not using the dashboard or just want to declaratively deploy their CRs, then no need to go through the orchestrator module.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. So it sounds like probably there should only ever be one drive group per node. Is that correct? Are there any situations where a node could have multiple drive groups?
Yes. So there is a host pattern key in every drive group where you can use glob expressions to map one drive group to an amount of hosts, right? So, but if you have non-uniform hosts, you probably want to have multiple drive groups. So in a simple case where you have like 5 nodes and all nodes look the same, you can use one drive group for all your nodes. But in a more advanced case, when you have non-uniform nodes, you have to have multiple drive groups that target one subset of your cluster.
But for each individual host, there is typically only one drive group.
It's not on a per host basis. It's rather on a per node collection basis.
Yeah.
That's also a good. Okay, so some of my proposal will have to change there. That like currently I was assuming there's like a node and a node has a drive group, but this is instead just a drive group exists for a cluster and would apply to whatever nodes have been added with node add commands via the orchestrator, for example.
I also have extensive examples in the doc in the drive group documentation that I just posted. That probably explains it a bit better.
Rook would need a way to translate the drive groups to which nodes they apply on, because Rook needs to start a job on each node where Ceph volume is run, right? So we would need to start the job with the drive group. And
why could Rook not just so if Ceph volume supports drive groups, if Ceph volume accepts a drive group as input and the drive group doesn't apply to that node, shouldn't Ceph volume just say, oh, okay, this node doesn't apply, I'm going to report success and continue? Which means Rook would then run drive groups on all nodes. And so then it actually doesn't have to have any logic whatsoever. It just has to run all the drive groups, all the nodes during OSD provisioning.
That would work.
That would certainly work.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I can remember there was
the logic.
Reason. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, keeping all the logic outside of Rook, I'm all for that. That sounds good. Keep it all in Ceph volume or the orchestrator, or that will help us with versioning issues in Rook for sure.
I just can't remember that there was a reason that my initial drive group pull request was against Ceph volume, and later on we decided against putting that into Ceph volume itself, but I can't remember the reason for that anymore.
Well,
there was a technical reason.
I think that Ceph volume was it was born like a tool to make easy to create OSDs in each of the host. Okay, so if we follow the principle that make simple tools to make simple things, okay, we should try to not to put too much features or too much capabilities in this tool, okay. Apart of that, I think that this really is not a problem, okay. We have the orchestrator layer, and in the orchestrator layer, what we can do is to make this translation and to provide Rook with a list of Ceph volume commands to use in each of the hosts, okay. So this is
Miguel, that would be kind of an alternative to Blaine's approach. Basically, we only have drive groups in the dashboard, and then they are transferred to the manager/Rook orchestrator module, and there the drive groups are translated to the list of drives, and the drives are then stored in the Ceph cluster CRD. That would be a way to implement drive groups in Rook without actually implementing drive groups in Rook, because the translation happens in the Rook manager module.
Yes, that's it. It's what I am saying.
Yeah. There was I just don't know if I like the idea of having a translation between the user interface into a completely different structure for Rook, and then back to Ceph volume. I don't know if we're really gaining so much by doing that.
But in this moment, Ceph volume is accepting drive groups?
No.
No. So with Ceph ADM, you are going to do exactly the same. You need to translate the drive group specifications in the orchestrator layer in order to have Ceph volume commands and use these Ceph volume commands to make things in external host. So basically, the translation between drive groups and Ceph volume commands is always in the Ceph orchestrator layer.
It's not in the orchestrator layer, it's in the Python common library layer.
Yes, but this library is called in the orchestrator modules, I think.
Yes.
It's what I'm saying, that we have between the external orchestrators and the dashboard, for example, we have one layer that is the manager modules for orchestration. And in this layer, what we should do is just to translate between drive groups and Ceph volume commands. And then use this translation to send the Ceph volume commands to the external orchestrator in order to do the things, okay? In both cases, I think that we can use exactly the same logic, exactly the same module, because it's just to make this translation. And the way to make the OST provisions using these Ceph volume commands should be different in the external orchestrators.
The problem with the term external orchestrator doesn't really apply for Ceph ADM.
Well, but you are executing a Ceph volume command using SSH, basically, and then creating a container.
Yeah, but the target host is dump. All the logic that we are talking about, translating stuff from one configuration to another, all the orchestration logic is fully combined in the manager Ceph ADM manager module. So there is no basically everything that lives in the Rook operator, all the Go code that lives in the Rook operator lives within the manager / Ceph ADM manager module. So there is no real external orchestrator.
Okay, it doesn't matter. The result is that with Ceph ADM, you are going to do more things that we will need to do in the Rook module, okay? Because the part of the provision is something that is going to happen in the external orchestrator in Rook, in our case, and not with Ceph ADM. But basically, what I'm saying is that the translation between drive groups and Ceph volume commands is something that is going to be in the orchestrators model.
So I'm not following, I guess, why, if we can put this in Ceph volume, where Ceph volume handles everything about drive groups, why are you seeing a benefit to using Ceph volume commands instead of that Ceph volume just handling all the drive groups?
Currently, the only advantage that I see that I can remember off the top of my head is that once different orchestrators use different tools and not Ceph volume, this logic would need to be implemented in that different tool. So currently we're just saying, Ceph ADM uses Ceph volume and Rook also uses Ceph volume, so it's kind of fine. We send out the same commands. But once, for example, Rook uses a different tool, then we could generate those different commands and send them over to Rook. So that's the only advantage that I currently see. Besides that, it probably doesn't matter.
Which was actually the case when we invented drive groups.
Yeah, so initially they were planned to go into Ceph volume.
Okay, so if Rook is using Ceph volume for drive groups, just passing it through, then it makes sense to keep it there. I think is what we're saying in Ceph volume.
I would say so, yes.
Okay.
I think we also decided against it because we needed a way to get the actual disks that are the result of the drive group in the dashboard, for example. And I think the dashboard does not have access to Ceph volume, like not natively.
No, it has access to Ceph volume inventory.
Right, not natively. I mean, it would have to call, it would have to pass Ceph volume, the drive group specification, and then like reach out to every host. Yeah, and then does it computation and send it back to the dashboard. But if it's implemented the way it currently is in Ceph, Python Ceph Common, then we would only need the Ceph inventory input of all the nodes, which can be cached, and then the computation can happen like natively inside that library, and then probably the representation in the dashboard is quicker and more native. Yeah, so I personally don't see I don't see too many advantages of having the drive groups being passed in Ceph volume. I think where it currently is, it's probably fine, I think. I mean, I'm not too sure how Rook exactly handles the OSD creation, but from a very general, like high level overview, it should be fine how it currently is.
And how it currently is, you're saying in the orchestrator module, translate to individual Ceph volume commands so that Rook would never see drive groups?
Yes.
I think if the drive groups are, this is a conversation I know kind of Travis has kind of said this in some different words, but I think if the drive groups are indeed declarative, having them in Rook is beneficial. Sebastian mentioned having a preference for having them in the CRD, and I don't like if kind of where we are now is we should track what Rook is doing in the CRD, even if it gets added and later removed. But if we have something declarative, I think we should use that compared to giving Rook a number of Ceph volume commands to use, which aren't really declarative. Those are I mean, while they can be idempotent, if it's a batch command, it doesn't feel like a very declarative specification for a thing. So yeah. we do need some way in Rook to either give drive groups to Ceph volume, which seems to me like it would be for Rook, that seems like the better solution. I think also for the SSH orchestrator, it kind of makes sense as well that you just call Ceph volume with that command or with that drive group attached. But if we have to instead call some utility to convert that Ceph volume command into or to convert that drive group into some set of Ceph volume commands, we can do that, but there is some difficulty in that we have to make sure that we're doing that with the same version of Ceph that we're using. It can't necessarily be the version of Ceph that Rook has in its operator container, which is generally going to be the highest version.
The way would be to, if we don't get drive groups into Ceph volume itself, then we could write a trivial wrapper that just wraps Ceph volume with an argument with drive groups. But I don't know if we really want to do that. I would pull in Jan into the discussion about if we can get drive groups into Ceph volume.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about why not to put it in Ceph volume for that processing layer. But yeah, thanks, Blaine, for clarifying it. Yeah, I definitely see that advantage of having drive groups in the CR on the Rook side. So.
Okay. Anything more about drive groups?
Nothing about drive groups specifically, although on the Rook OSD edition removal topic, I did have another question. Two more questions, I guess. So I'll jump ahead to the one that came up based on, I'm not sure who's been writing in the sort of red-orange color, but so Rook currently, or at least in my design, doesn't plan on zapping OSDs on removal, being that might mean that the OSDs are automatically re-added by Rook, which the user might not expect. But it looks like the Ceph ADM module linked here does intend to do that using a Ceph volume zap command.
Yeah. So we.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing other people's thoughts about why to zap or why not to zap.
So we had a discussion a couple of days ago, also with Sage, and so my argument for zapping is that so the concerns from people why we shouldn't zap was that there is a potential data loss, but due to the approach that we take in our OSD removal process is that the OSD is completely clean and has no PGs in it anymore. So, and we also have OK to stop and OK to destroy commands before this. So the probability of losing data while zapping is close to zero. And in my experience, people actually expect that the disk is clean. It has no LVs on them anymore and no partitions. So that's why we added zapping on top of it. But I'm also not entirely sure if that's the right plan, if that's the right thing to do. I mean,
So with the declarative approach, I guess the question I have is, even outside of Rook, if it's a declarative approach, if the drive still matches the drive group spec, is the orchestrator going to turn around and re-add that OSD after it's removed, or does the drive group spec allow us to blacklist OSDs so it doesn't do that, or how do we avoid adding them back in the declarative case?
Well, the thing is, at least the workflow for the Ceph ADM is I mean, you do have declarative drive group specification, so but you have to actually issue a command to deploy OSDs. So if an operator decides that he wants to remove OSD with ID number 1, he can do that, but then he shouldn't call the OSD deployment command again, because then he will end up with the same OSD again, right?
Right.
So usually,
the way that Rook works, though, that orchestration can run without Ceph kicking it off. And so
okay.
if the user removes an OSD in this way and zaps it then it like once that zap is done, Rook may change and then go and provision that.
Yeah,
that
so I see.
again.
So I thought about adding. I don't know if it's in the RFC that I posted here or not, but I thought about adding a flag that's called something like preserve disk or preserve whatever data, and that just would not do the zapping. Because I can see it having an advantage. So some people definitely want to have it zapped automatically, but for the Rook case, I definitely see the problem here. So if we just add an option and default it to not zap on Rook, I think that'd be fine now. Because blacklisting is difficult, right? So if it's a complete declarative approach, what do you want to blacklist, right?
Right.
Exactly. I definitely see the advantage of zapping it because people want things clean if they remove it. Yeah, maybe the default to not zap.
That relates to the glob argument for the target of the drive groups. So if we have different means of specifying to which host a drive group should apply, like labels or any other mean, then we would have maybe a better control of blacklisting a whole host for that drive groups. Like if you're removing an OSD, we could automatically remove the host from being part from being a target for that specific drive group.
That seems like it might cause greater problems though. Like being that like you want that drive group to apply with the exception of like one OSD. So I mean that seems like something that would be good for an interim. It's like, okay, I removed this disk, now like pause orchestration on that node while I can go remove the disk, but if someone forgets to remove the disk or whatever, that seems like it might cause problems with, if users are like, why is this node not getting updates? And then
so what we actually could do is so the disks that are flagged as available and hence are used by the drive groups or by Ceph volume in the end depend on the available flag that Ceph volume sets. So we could leverage Ceph volume to set LVM tags saying that this should not be used or this should be flagged as unavailable. So you could then target on a host basis on individual disks by using LV tags.
Okay.
If it's been zapped, can you put the LV or the LVM tags on there? I'm not sure how they work. Or do you need an LV to add tags?
I actually don't know.
So
I would guess you'd need an LV to add tags to it. Although that doesn't mean that there can't be like more going on where Ceph volume zaps the disk clean and then creates a new LV with the sole purpose of having a tag that is do not use for Ceph. Or what is it? PV? Can I tag a PV? Is that a thing?
So I kind of like the idea of using LV tags.
Yeah, because we're already using LV tags for basically everything Ceph volume related anyway. So maybe that's the right approach. So.
It looks like tags can be added to PVs as well.
Yeah.
So either way, it would be good for Ceph volume to have some mechanism of zapping and then also like blacklisting that device for future editions using LV tags.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious to see what we need for, if we need an LV for that. Because, in Rook, we're also moving away from having Ceph volume use LVM at all for the OSDs and just having what we call raw mode. so we don't have that LVM dependency. Okay. One other idea I had is, would this be a place where we could use the drive group limits to say, if we remove a device, reduce the limit of OSDs we want to create on the node? Would that sort of prevent?
The limit applies to all hosts.
Yeah, so if you configure your drive group to match all hosts and then you set the limit, it would target all hosts anyway. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
So if you have a dedicated drive group for each individual host because they're all different, then that will work. But
I see. Okay. That won't work then.
Okay. So it seems like after this we kind of have two things to talk to Jan about with Ceph volume. One being whether Ceph volume can accept drive groups as inputs that will get converted to batch operations within Ceph volume itself. Another one to add a flag when removing an OSD to be able to blacklist or whatever terminology we want to use the disk, so it won't be added by Ceph volume. That's using the LVM tags. Just making sure that we're kind of, at least I'm making sure I want to keep track of what things we want to be asking for, make sure this is all working smoothly. I do have one last question, if there's not more on from anyone on what we've already talked about.
I mean, there's a bigger topic for OSD replacements, but that's a whole another topic for.
And we are running a bit out of time.
Yeah, we're running out of time, so I would say also we skip that because replacement is a bit more of a delicate operation than just removal.
Yep.
But
yeah. My plan was to leave replacement until after add and remove has been implemented.
Yep.
With the thought that add and remove are kind of critically necessary, and replace is kind of a nice to have. The last thing I have is something that is probably more Rook related, but I thought would be good to bring up here anyway, about whether the Ceph Manager module should be quote unquote opinionated, whether it should just sort of kind of by force take over the storage configuration section of the Rook cluster, Ceph cluster CRD OSDs via drive groups. So this could mean that user configuration is a little bit borked by using the dashboard, but it does mean that then the dashboard is sort of taking charge and is being opinionated and saying that I'm going to be the way to manage OSDs now. So it sounds like since drive groups are sort of applied to clusters at a time and not individual nodes, one of my questions of whether the manager module should only take over a single node at once or an all or nothing approach is sort of more the all or nothing. But it would be interesting to hear people think, could be good or bad or, the right thing to do there.
For and use all devices equal colon true type of cluster, as you can specify a drive group that does it for you. That use case would be kind of trivial because it already uses drive groups. It's just about taking over existing clusters with non-trivial storage configs, right?
I think it's more like if the user has specified something in the storage config, and then the user starts using drive groups, should using the dashboard, either the dashboard or the CLI module automatically remove those pre-existing user configs, assuming that the new drive groups-based configs are the preferred way of doing things.
I do like the idea of the manager module being opinionated, since the dashboard will want to drive it. At the same time, if we're saying with the drive groups design, if we're just putting the whole drive groups section in the CR, it could be independent of the other settings, and the operator could still be implemented such that it's allowing all of them to be specified. Right, so even if we do that at the Rook layer, that we support those, I think having the manager module opinionated also makes sense. Could depend on implementation too.
I don't know. I have to think about it, if it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think this is also a question that we can, we can also decide later. It doesn't have to go along necessarily with the proposal that I've been preparing for Rook. Like, we can make a decision and change it, or I don't know, my interim decision would probably be to be as little change of what the user has configured as possible as makes sense, and then decide later if actually we should be doing that, or to add options to do that in the dashboard or something, if that does make sense. Although I don't want to add a whole bunch of specific stuff to the dashboard if that's not necessary.
Mm.
Yeah, that sounds good to hold off on that decision if we don't need it. I don't think we need it today.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll just add a note. They're like, we'll think over this. Feel free to chime in, have opinions. Tweaks. For now, assume not to change user configs, and revisit this as an individual topic later.
So we are now really out of time.
No, we have 2 minutes.
We have 2 minutes, yes.
I just wanted to highlight the last item here, the OSD support manager module that I created. So that currently supports draining OSDs, and that will probably also be beneficial for the removal operation for Rook. So feel free to have a look.
Yeah, I think this might be the 132.677. Yeah, okay. So this is linked from the design that I have, and
cool.
I think it makes sense for us to want to use as much of this module as possible if we can for our logic. So that's great.
Cool. That's good.
Sounds good.
Okay. I guess that's it. That's it for this week.
Mm-hmm. Great discussion. Thanks all.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.